of reconciliation, I learned from my own family, own ancestor, and our own land. So it was very painful story, but it is every day in our everyday life. So land rights, when we're talking about reconciliation and land rights, they are actually very interconnected. We cannot talk about reconciliation without land rights. So I would like to acknowledge I have been currently living last 10, 11 years in 3D6 territory. It's Métis, Cree, Dene First Nation community in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon. I have a lots of opportunity to learn from the Indigenous community, learn from the Indigenous scholar and elder knowledge keepers. And I have been also working with Indigenous community back home. My PhD research was with one of the Indigenous community in Bangladesh. Then I also work with Sami Indigenous community in Finland. I also work with a Maori Indigenous community in New Zealand, and also Lakota, Dakota in USA, the north part of the USA. I'm also currently learning, actually a long time I'm learning Cree First Nation language, because my most work with the Cree First Nation communities in Saskatchewan, and also trying to learn Dene First Nation community. I'm also currently working with Indigenous community in Inuit Indigenous community, their food sovereignty and their climate change. So last 15 years I have been working with various Indigenous community. Before that I was learning from my own community, from my own Indigenous community. So I can speak my own language, Indigenous language, and mainstream language, Bangla, then English, and other Indigenous languages. That gave me the opportunity to learning from the other Indigenous community. So it's one of the big part for learning this one. So basically, again, I'm going to talk about what is the meaning of reconciliation from my own perspective, and also from my my own research with my own community and other Indigenous community from North America, and also some Indigenous perspective. And this is the book we just came out last week that we have been, this is edited collection. One of the some Indigenous elder and knowledge keeper was, she wrote, what is the meaning of reconciliation from some Indigenous perspective? And couple of Indigenous elder also wrote their chapter. What does it mean, reconciliation in Canada? Because in Canada, I'm guest. I am immigrant. So I had to learn the meanings of reconciliation from the Indigenous people over there, and how have been practicing last 9 to 10 years. So various professional they wrote how they have been practicing and learning from their own life. So the meanings of reconciliation from and within Indigenous perspective, from and within, because I'm also from Indigenous perspective, and also the Indigenous meanings of I was learning, it was also it was very connected with my own learning. That's why it's from and within Indigenous community from my last 15 years. Though before we start, I would like to bring the conceptualization. What does the reconciliation mean from my last 15 years journey? So I learned from my own community again from the various perspective, cross-cultural perspective on reconciliation. First one came up in various discussion or my Indigenous elder knowledge keeper. Land right is the first issue for building reconciliation or talking about reconciliation. So it's significant issue, land rights, according to the community. Second one is we need to know what knowledge have been colonized, how the colonization has been started from various parts of the world, and why Indigenous knowledge has been successful for million years. And within 100 years or 150 years, all became colonized. So we have to decolonize our ways of knowing and ways of doing. Another one was important factor to learn, respect, and honor Indigenous ways of doing, knowing and doing. Why it is? If you look at we are talking about climate change, sustainability for a long time. If you look at the Indigenous people, they have been living in the world very sustainable way for many thousands years. So actually we have the example. We as a researcher, we need to learn how they have been doing and incorporate with our Western ways of knowing. Another important part I learned to learn and respect TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. They gave the 94 call to action item, how to follow the reconciliation, and it's applicable in Canada, of course, all over the people in all over the world. Another important part, Indigenous people, they want academics, researcher to work with the Indigenous community. However, they want to solve their problem from their learning from the Western perspective. In most cases, they have been getting used by the Western perspective. So it's a huge worldview and knowledge understanding perspective. Another one is very important. To reconciliation mean is reclaiming and protect land, water, climate, and language. Actually, this is the water, land, if you think about, is not only for Indigenous people. It's for all of us. So that's why when we talk about reconciliation, it's not for the Indigenous people. It's for me, it's for you. So we need to make our bring with all of us as a solidarity, so that the water problem, the climate problem is all of our problems. So that's why Indigenous, when they talk about, they wanted to protect the land, water, and their culture and language. So, as we know now, the meanings of reconciliation from my 15 years, there are other many meanings, but these are the meanings I found it was significant for the community perspective. Community found many challenges. Why not reconciliation happening? Even though there is a knowledge holder, elders, or scientists, they have been doing many research in all over the world, particularly North America. So what are the challenges community has been facing on those issues? The first one is very important, is miscommunication. The scientists, they have a very miscommunication or pre-assumption about the Indigenous people. The Indigenous people, they don't know what is the meaning of development. Actually, concept of development, Indigenous people, even my own community, have been using for a long time. We understand the meanings of development, very different perspective. So we as a researcher, we need to decolonize our ways of knowing. So community found, even I found in my own research, I wrote on this issue, what is the challenges in Western research. Main one of the main point was miscommunication. Failed to address decolonization. And decolonization is not about excluding one over another. Decolonization is bridging. Decolonization is knowing we as a researcher, if you go to the community, we come back, but community is there. So we have to know how community can be benefited from our research. And we as a researcher, we also can learn from the community. So decolonization is help to know both of these, build the bridge both parts. And community found is not bridging. What is going on is not bridging, it's going on new forms of colonization. Refusal of Indigenous self-governance. When we do research, how many articles, how many videos, how many we think, how community is going to benefit from my research? How they can use my statistical analysis or my report going to solve their policy change or solve their problem, solve their water crisis, that they don't have the drinking water at home. I want to give one small example. I was working with Dene First Nation communities in up north. 1 gallon of milk we buy $5 from in Saskatoon. In up north is $45. 1 bottle of water is less than $1 in south side. In north is more than $5. And 1 can of water, Coke, is $2. Bottle of water $3, $4. Can is $2. And water got contaminated because uranium mining was there. Now uranium mining is gone. Water got contaminated. Their land got contaminated. Everything got polluted. But people are still there. What they are going to do now? Who make them dependent? Who make them frustrated? So indigenous people, that the self-governance one of the significant part of their reconciliation. And lack of collaborative approach. When we talk about the indigenous people, the Linda speech, she wrote decolonizing our ways of knowing. When we talk about indigenous people, we think when we talk with the one elder, one large keeper, they know everything. Even though within the room, how many diversified knowledge we have, can we come out one conclusion or one decision? So indigenous knowledge is so diverse, according to community, elders to elders, knowledge keeper to knowledge keepers, and all these knowledge are interconnected and significant for the indigenous people. So indigenous people, they see this is the another issue that Western research, they don't see collaborative approach within the community. Settler colonialism. So what is the settler colonialism? Indigenous land has been, the colonizer, they went over there, they open indigenous people by making genocide. Without indigenous people, still they are doing it. Until we understand who we are in our land, whose land we are working, is still making the colonization. And it's not only applicable to Canada, it's applicable to Canada, Norway, Sweden, Finland, South Africa, Bangladesh, everywhere. The new forms of colonization is going every day. And racism in everyday practice, we don't see it because we don't face it. Indigenous people, they face it every day in new forms, new ways of doing. So if you look at the Human Rights Commission, one of UNDP Deputy High Commissioner, he said, progress that destroy traditional culture, language, land, and human heritage is not development. It's willful destruction. So the talk I was giving in general from my last 15 years experience, I would like to give very specific example that I'm doing last 5 years from my 2 case studies. One is working with the indigenous energy issue with my Benting postdoctoral fellowship. Another one I have been working with another project, how to build capacity to the indigenous people as a forms of reconciliation. I use participatory action research and also indigenous relational theoretical framework and methodology. And as a method, I use elder and knowledge holder stories, music, and blanket exercise. Blanket exercise is indigenous people, they talk about their colonial history. And they also talk about how they want to decolonize. So it's knowledge coming from the community, knowledge coming from the elder, knowledge keeper. So it's one of the indigenous methods that actually teaching researcher how to do it. And story sharing, you know it. Commonplace book is a different one. Indigenous people, they keep the commonplace book. And my previous research, this is the research from my own indigenous community. The first time the indigenous people, they wrote in their language 4 commonplace book in their history. So it's empowered the indigenous people. They are writing their own history. They are writing their own books, own ways of doing. Okay, so before we start, give my example, concrete example, I want to ask ourselves, what and why does reconciliation matter to me? Actually, I'm asking myself before I'm talking about. So it can situate me. Why I'm doing this research, for whom I'm doing the research. Another one is, what is the colonial history of this region? Another one, and these questions came up from the indigenous perspective. They want us to know this question before we trying to talk about the reconciliation. Who occupied this land before establishment of current border or national government? Very important. So as you know, the pipeline is a huge issue in North America. The province I'm currently living is also lots of oil. So our oil is crude oil. And recently there is a pipeline leak. It happened in 2016, 250,000 liter oil spill. And most of the oil spill is in the indigenous reserve area. And with connected with the indigenous drinking water, agricultural land, spiritual land. And I'm living in Saskatchewan. Alberta, and Manitoba, 3 provinces. And within 3 provinces, actually it holding more than 75% of the oil leak within these 3 provinces. And these 3 provinces actually mostly indigenous places. Most of the indigenous people in Canada, they lives in 3 provinces. And this is the most recent at the leaks. If you can see last 10 years, what happened? The 2016, 2016, 2015, every year almost there is a leak. I want to give you another example that came last week in news. In last year news, from, as you can say, November 16, they said, it's big news, 18.9 billion liter of oil leaked in Saskatchewan, only one province. And this is from the CBC. Canadian Broadcasting Center. How big the billion is, how long it takes to count. Just let's give an example. So I just tried to count from also from the CBC calculation. 2.6 million liter is roughly one Olympic size of swimming pool. So 19 million leaks, how many swimming pools? Can you imagine? 7,307 swimming pool oil only leak, only Saskatchewan, and is connected with the water, agricultural land. So these leaks mostly connected with the river, the wetland, and also the agricultural land. So it's not going away, it's staying there. So it's not only impacting human, it's impacting our drinking water, agriculture, and also forest, and also animals. We need money. We need money, and oil is not going away. The amount of oil only Saskatchewan, Alberta we have is more than Saudi Arabia. So oil is not going away. So that's why you need to think about it. How is happening, and who is going to get impacted? So what is the meaning of land? The indigenous perspective. One of the elder, 97 years old, he said, land is not for human. Land is for everything. What does it mean? Then he drew a picture for me. When you talk about land, we sell it, we gain it. The meanings of land is lake, is caribou, is birds, is plant, is moon, is sun, is everything to the indigenous perspective. And you can see the perspective of world views of meanings of land, how broad can be. And elders teach us, reconciliation is a lifelong learning process and relearning process. It's not one time, okay, I did it, done. It may take whole life. My future generation. If colonization has been created 100 years, it may take 300 years to reclaim it or making the reconciliation. So elder in Dene First Nation community, he said reconciliation, we cannot talk reconciliation without talking decolonization. Decolonization is talking about colonization. How colonization has been created, how colonization has been impacting indigenous people. We need to know it. And relearning how we can work together. Indigenous people, they want to work together. Just don't misunderstand it. They want to work together. So it's very significant positive aspect that they are offering. We need to know indigenous knowledge has been very important. In my book, I said, knowledge holder, knowledge keeper, they are the main teacher or professor, those who have been teaching the community for a long time. And they can give the lots of opportunity for me. And he was talking, reconciliation means collaborative ways of knowing from elder, bringing into the Western science, and Western science also can learn from the indigenous perspective. And indigenous children, they are finding fossil. Why? They wanted to find their ancestor relationship, how ancestor has been doing with the indigenous community. So they are giving example. Another one is doing learning from relational way, learning from plant, learning from the rock, learning from the water. Why water is important in my life? Why water is not important for everyone? So everything is important. Water is God. God is not invisible. God, their God lives, our God lives every day with us. We can touch it, we can feel it, and we have a responsibility to protect it. So relational ways of learning, how the indigenous community has been living for a long time sustainable way, how they did it. And also this learning, we as a researcher, we have responsibility to learn ourselves and also take this knowledge to our future generation so that future generation can see the importance of that knowledge. And as you can see, you were in it was most of these photos from the Dene First Nation communities. They have been actually teaching indigenous elder their young generation why the learning, relational learning is so important. And relational learning is also learning from the rock and learning from the moon. So moon, sun, water, everything is interconnected. So meanings of reconciliation, we need to redefine, because many people, they think reconciliation is one event or two events or three events, then done. Reconciliation, what does the meaning of reconciliation, that research, that two researchers that I have been working last 8-9 years. First one, we need to understand first as a researcher who we are and where we came from. So this question actually situates when we go to the community. Who, if we can tell me who I am as my story, they can they can relate me who they are. The second question, who owns the land we work or live on? The other one, what does decolonization mean to us or mean to me? It's not mean to for the other people or mean to the student. It's mean to me. What are the indigenous histories of Canada or Norway or the Latin America or other parts of the world that we are working? What did decolonizer do to the indigenous people of Canada or other parts of the world? Or with my own indigenous community? How does reconciliation look like for me? What are the responsibility for me that I need to take care? This book, The Reconciliation in Practice, it's all about talking about responsibility. How we can practice in our everyday life. It's not only writing. How we can practice it. It's not theory. It's all about practice. Indeed, how we can work together. And indigenous scholar Mari Botis from our university, she said, first we need to think about how you are related with me. Water issue or other problem is not our other people, it's not otherness. As Edward Said talk about it, it's all of our problem. So until or unless we don't, if we cannot bring within us this problem is for all of us, the reconciliation will not happen. It will be otherness. So why do we need to learn about land? Land education, because land education is bring the social justice. It's relate me, connect me, what I can do and what I have been doing. So this is the perspective, previous perspective, indigenous people, they want researcher to understand it when they are doing research. What indigenous people need for reconciliation? First one is indigenous people that I have been talking is their land rights. Another one was talking about TRC call for action, truth and reconciliation. They gave the specific direction how reconciliation should work. Indigenous self-determination that we have been talking about and self-governance. Indigenous knowledge need, one thing we need to understand, if knowledge has been, even if you use anthropological perspective, Levi-Strauss, classical anthropology, he said, if knowledge has been successful for a long time, this is more science. Even Thomas Kuhn, he explained meanings of science. If you don't consider it as a science, this is our problem because we don't understand the science. That's why indigenous people knowledge, they don't need validation from the Western science because they know it's working for thousands years. if you look at the modern history or modern knowledge, it's just only 200 years. The amount of damage they made, it equal more than damage, equivalent damage than the million years. So we have to rethink why indigenous knowledge has been doing sustainable ways for 1,000 years. Protecting indigenous language and culture is significant part of the reconciliation. Honoring, creating space for indigenous system to capacity building is significant part. So reconciliation is all about capacity building to all of us. Towards interconnected consciousness, we need to know what, as you have seen, the one example I gave you from my recent research, how just only one, I was talking about oil pipeline leak, there is a diamond company, there is a residential school, there are many other aspects is happening every day. So we need to educate ourselves. What is going on, how it's happening, and how we can reclaim those issues consciously. And considering research as a community capacity building. We are learning, we are getting publication, we are getting benefited. They also need to get benefit from it. Otherwise, we are creating recolonization for the people. So that's why our research should be, according to community perspective, should be or must build the community capacity. Otherwise, community is not getting benefited. So our research, we can transform our research into action, maybe small action. That they wrote 4 books, it didn't change anything, but we took a step. And this is the small example all of we can take. And providing sufficient funding for the community. So in our research, when we do policy analysis or recommendation, we should advocate for the indigenous knowledge and also advocate for the funding so that community, they can build their capacity by themselves. So that is my in general talk. So we can discuss about it. Any questions comes up. Because shortage of the time, I wanted to just keep more time on discussion.
Thank you, Rajan, for a really, really nice and reflective presentation. It made me to think a lot on transitional justice, what it means, and what it means reconciliation on transitional justice is a process that we has been all around the world. As I told you when we introduced each other, I am from Peru, from Latin America, and we have gone through many of these transitional justice processes in the region, and of course there has been difference among the processes. I think the first ones, I don't think they take any consideration on the idea of there has been a difference of the type of violence that affect the different layers and groups in the society. So it's like an homogeneous process. So all of us has to go through the same process, and then reconciliation was, let's say, the mainstream from the more occidental parts of the societies. And even in cases like the Peruvian case, that where you have 80% of the population that were killed during the war were indigenous that were speaking Quechua. No? So that brings a lot of problems that I think in many of our countries were not fully understood. And it's interesting because, I mean, you are aware of what is going on in Chile now, and there was this famous picture with the Mapuche flag in the top of the protest in the statue. And the Mapuches I don't know how much you know, is the Mapuches, there was a state in the south of Chile. And this group of people resist the Spanish colony. So they were not part of the Spanish colony. They were a frontier, and they were an independent state from the Spanish when the Spanish arrived to Chile. But then when the Republic, they were brutally colonized. And the Mapuches has been trying to resist to this colonization for years and years and years. And one of the main issues was land and water. Yeah. But there was this idea of the national state that took them the land and water. So the whole territory has been just reduced to the minimum. And after the Pinochet regime, with the transitional justice processes, this special violence that the Mapuche suffer also from the Pinochet and in the history of Chile, in a way was neglected as something that was special. It's not that some of the killings of the Mapuches were part of the research, but as this was part of the same type of violence that comes to the other, like more Occidental people from the left parties in Santiago, when it's absolutely different. And now the people realize, the Mapuches were right. We have a problem with the water in Chile. We have a problem with the neoliberal reforms that were implemented in the 80s. And then they are bringing back the importance of the struggle from the Mapuches people for the whole Chilean society. So I think that when your presentation it makes me to think a lot about the need to challenge this idea of what is reconciliation. It's not something that can package. We have to unpackage that. And we have to think that in many countries that has been linked to the idea of pardon. And you say it's one event. So we talk, we know the truth, and then there is a reconciliation as something that comes like magic. And that didn't allow in many countries to challenge colonization. And also to challenge the idea that violence and people can be upset. And violence in many of these cases, protests and struggles, have still like the roots on the colonial relation that we have in many of these parts of the world. So yeah, I mean, thanks a lot. I mean, this idea of the meanings, I think it's necessary that we reflect much more on this when we are speaking about transitional justice, because in other cases just land as a colonial discourse, and in a way it covers the struggles of the people, and to realize that there could be autocratic states, but autocratic states is going to affect different people in different groups of the people in different ways. So thank you for the really inspiring lecture. And I would like to open the space for comments, questions, and
So, thank you, Dr. Dalton. Test. Thank you for the presentation. That was really great. You live and do research in a very interesting part of Canada, the western part, or the plains, the area of Canada, which is probably, you could say, the part of Canada that has been subjected to the most intensive forms of settler colonization. The land has actually been converted from its traditional uses to ranch lands, farmlands. Indigenous people there have been, maybe even more intensely than elsewhere in Canada, reduced to, pushed off of their traditional lands into small sorts of reserves. And this is the part of Canada that has the most intense resource development work right now. And you made the point in your presentation that one of the conditions, a key condition of reconciliation, is land rights. It strikes me that the part of Canada that you operate is the part of Canada that has the biggest challenge with reconciling land rights to Indigenous people. There are lots of other parts of Canada where there have been land claims and self-government agreements. I'm from the Northwest Territories up north, where because there's not a high settler population, it has been somewhat easier to return the land, if you will, to Indigenous authority. But in your part, I believe there's been one tiny land claim in, I think it's southern Manitoba, and other than that, nothing in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Can you say something about the particular challenges in your part of Canada to land reclamation as opposed to the North or British Columbia or places like this where there's been more success over the past 20 or 30 years?
First of all, I would like to acknowledge I'm not a land from the justice perspective. I'm not expert on this. I can share my learning experience that I have learned from the Indigenous scholars, knowledge keeper, and elders. We have few Indigenous reserve area. If you look at the Indigenous reserve area, they protect the diversity, they protect water, they protect many as much as they can. If you look at the Indigenous, the Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba is the big part, west part of the Canada. And most of this land was Indigenous people, as you said, and it was open to the non-Indigenous people without their consent by the name of multiculturalism. So land has been stolen from the Indigenous people. Many Indigenous scholars, they're talking about how land has been stolen. From my city, is the colonization started in 1885, just 130 years something. And with 130 years, the amount of damage that I have shown in my research, as you can see. So, and that is one of the good example how modern ways of using land is actually creating problem for all of the people. So how land rights or land law, their Indigenous people are fighting. As you say, in our province, the other two provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, we are too behind in terms of the Indigenous land rights. That's why Indigenous people, they wanted to bring the land rights first so that they can protect it at first place. And Indigenous people, they are not opposing the development, but it has to be meaningful to the Indigenous people, has to be balance the capacity building for both so that they can protect their water. Actually, it's not their water, it's all of our water, all of our responsibility. So that's when they talk about the land rights, it is also important for the water rights. The research I was doing, the pipeline leaks in 2016 happened by the Husky, the company. Many Indigenous elder and knowledge keeper I spoke, the 4 Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan, they didn't know there was a pipeline at all before the leak. At all. And as you can see, 18.9 billions of leak happened last 20 years. And more than 70% leaks happen within Saskatchewan and Alberta, and Manitoba, 3 provinces. So Indigenous Canada is doing, if you look at the Canada, they are doing, according to government, they are doing huge work, but they don't have drinking water, Indigenous people. Most of the Indigenous people, the advisory is going on, it's in Indigenous people. So when we talk about the land rights, it's also water rights. It's also mental issue. It's also the education, the land-based education. Everything is missing. So in very specific, I cannot give you the right the policy perspective, but I can share what community feels about it. And Indigenous people, they have a treaty rights. When a colonizer, they went over there, they made a treaty. So treaty is there. What the government, they need to do, they need to follow this treaty. So policy is there, direction is there. That is problem is, as you brought, that they are not following it. and it's the one of the extreme colonization, or new forms, new ways of everyday is going on. So indigenous people, they want their treaty rights. Through the treaty, they want to protect their land and water. And yeah, I agree with you that this condition is more serious in these three provinces.
So thanks a lot. It was very interesting. So I've many different questions, and one is in a way following up on Aaron's, and maybe I'm sort of pushing on what you said is not your expertise, but with some colleagues in India, we did some research into, that the constitution in India, they were very early in recognizing rights to land for indigenous people or tribals, that's what they were called in different parts of India, with different provisions for the northeast and for the mainland India. So the majority tribal areas in the northeast had more autonomy. And then what turns out is that it's very difficult for so even if they have special protections, they're the only group with special land rights recognized in the constitution. Of course, the land is being taken a lot. And it's being privatized also by people within the tribal communities a lot. So you get a tribal elite and a lot of landless people in some areas. But also taken by industry, taken in many different ways. And it's interesting because you said there are treaties. And I think that what we found was not surprising, but what you find is that there are so many different laws regulating the same land. So you can use mining laws or forestry laws or other types of laws to undermine the land rights of indigenous people in the area. And I think I think it's, you were saying Saskatchewan is particular, but there are many indigenous areas around the world that are particularly attractive for industry because that's part of, in many cases, where most of the remaining mineral reserves, the potential for doing hydroelectric dams and so on are found. So I think that's really one of the challenges, is to try sort of, or it's a sort of an adjacent challenge, is to try and understand more about how to make the treaties have teeth in relation to sort of other forms of land. And also, of course, I think there is this issue in many of these areas, that there are many people who have been living on the land for a long time, and that there are these different the negotiations that needs to be done. So that's more of a comment, but just sort of. And then another question that I have when I listen to you, and that is sort of, and it's really interesting, your perspective on research into indigenous issues. So, and it makes me also, I mean, I just want you to reflect a bit on the role of researchers who come from outside. Is that sort of course, that's partly who you were speaking to, but is it sort of inherently problematic, or do you think that should researchers from outside do research on indigenous issues? And yeah.
I have a very personal story on this perspective, because it's one of the significant questions. Can non-indigenous people do research with indigenous communities? In my research, PhD research and postdoc research, indigenous people, when they talk about research, they get scared. Linda Smith, she said research is a mosquito. Suck your blood, then leave. In my elder, they say it's a foreign bird. When they comes, they take whatever they need, then leave. They discover afterwards. They discover us, even though knowledge has been there for 1,000 years. They learn from the community, but when they go to the academia, they call it discovered or they never show up. According to the Sean Wilson, he is one of the indigenous scholars from the Saskatchewan. They need us. However, we need to work in a way, we need to change our worldview. We need to think how indigenous knowledge has been sustainable. Why indigenous knowledge is so important for the community. We cannot push one way. The only Western ways or the way I got trained, this is the only way we are the best. So we need to think how we can work, bridge with these gaps that indigenous people talking about. And we need to think how we can do our research alternatively, not only writing reports, not only writing the publications, only giving to the statistics. When I was doing my research, indigenous people, when they asked me, okay, I gave them statistics, sharing them. I was working as a research associate for one of the research organization in back home. And elder said, what I'm going to do with these statistics? I don't understand it. I didn't tell you those statistics. What does the number mean? Number has importance. However, their story is also important. So we need to bring these both together. And how we can do it? If we face any problems, we can ask the elders. We can ask the community what they want. So not only one elder, not only one knowledge keeper, or not only one leaders. You can talk with many people, you will find many opportunities. And this is maybe starting point. And as we work, we will learn many perspectives. And we need them, they also need us. Actually, we need to think about we, not we versus others. That's what I learned. And it's a process I will learn in future more. I learn every day.
I have more questions if you need. I want to add to that.
I've got one.
Yeah, please.
And this is probably also to another question that maybe is a bit more mainstream politics related, but Canada just had a federal election a month ago, maybe less even. Overwhelming support for the right and even the far right in the area that you work in. A lot of the frustration that that region expressed toward the coastal parties, if you will, was over the carbon tax and other policies that the Conservatives in the center of Canada are concerned will reduce resource development in this area. And the upset was so intensive that there has even been this talk of Western Canada separation, or Wexit. So, I mean, on one hand, there's definitely been this increased tone in Canada since the TRC about reconciliation, and yet, if anything, especially in the area of Canada where you're working, there seems to be a recent political move toward more intensive resource development, more intensive maybe rejection of at least some of the ideas that would have to go with reconciliation. Do you have any perspectives on that? Do you hear anything from the Indigenous communities regarding this Wexit idea of Western Canadian separation? Just curious what your thoughts are.
It is in our everyday part now, because we have been discussing a lot. If you look at the colonization, it's created lots of genocide. It's happening every day. Indigenous people, they became minority in their own land. And the colonization also has changed the pattern of land use to the indigenous community as well. So If you look at the voting result, of course, the most of the settler, the people are there settler in Saskatchewan, Alberta, particularly, and the most of these seat, Saskatchewan, the current government didn't get not a single seat. And even Trudeau government, he didn't talk that much about reconciliation during his election campaign. He didn't talk about that much missing and murder Indigenous issue, because he knew that there's a huge settler colonialism is going on, or huge voting power over there. It's not that he wants to do it, but there is lots of work that Indigenous scholar, educators, and Indigenous elders, they are doing or trying to do, because Indigenous people, they have been surviving with these lots of struggles. If you look at my own community, they have been still living there. Land has been taken. Still every day is taking. Outsider coming and taking the land every day. But still Indigenous people, those who are living over there, they say, if we have land rights today, whatever land we have, we will live sustainable life. The outsider, they are coming, making profit, bringing the outsider, more outsider. Government is supporting the outsider as well. The same thing happening in Canada as well. And that's why they need us, because most people, they are colonizer or settler colonialism. That's why we need to support them. And this is the part of our research that we can talk about through our research. We can talk about our publication. We can make videos, many other ways. So that's why when we talk, we are not just giving presentation and going home. We are building relationship. What does the relationship mean? That means we are responsible each other. Responsible to the people that we are working. And our research is not neutral. Our research is very biased. Biased for the people. Biased for the social justice. That's why my research that I have been working last 15 years is very biased. And we have to claim it, that our research is not neutral. We are taking the side. We need to take the side. Even though it's not happening, it's need, because as you see the crisis, world crisis, the climate change, the water issues, war, for whom? What is going on, the uranium mine. Last in May, I went to Russia, in Archangels. The governor was saying, we need diamond companies, many companies. Then I asked them, what about the Indigenous people over the land? Indigenous people all gone. There are 4 Indigenous elders, they were sitting beside me, they were crying. So what we can do? We can do many things, even though it's small, but if we can do a small thing, it will make one day big. We need to change, we need to take action. That's what I learned. It's a very interesting and significant issue is going on, discussion.
Thanks a lot. I think with that words that encourage us to take the action, we finish this session, and thanks a lot for the presentation and for your participation. And as I say, this was part of the series on transitional justice that we are organizing, so please keep up.
But also, there will be
And there is going to be a seminar tomorrow, also, more related with natural resources and climate change.
Climate change. Yeah. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about my own social action I'm doing in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, at 12 o'clock here. So, thanks a lot.
It's by the Center for Climate and Energy Transformation.
It will be here, right?
Yes. I was going to ask you a question, actually. That was my plan now. I was going to ask you a question about